Dr. Alastair Finch, a botanist who went deep into the Amazonian basin, seeking a legendary flower rumored to bloom only in total darkness. He was last seen in a remote Brazilian village known for its syncretic black magic, a terrifying fusion of Catholic rites and indigenous forest sorcery. Finch's final communication was a garbled satellite message sent from the village square. It consisted of a single sentence: "They worship the sun, but their hands are cold." The village, called Nuovo Sol, or New Sun, was found abandoned a week later. The authorities, citing a natural migration, quickly closed the case. But a private investigator, hired by Finch's University, found the truth buried in the village church. The church was built from rough, unpainted wood, unremarkable except for the altar. Instead of a cross, the altar held a smooth black obsidian sphere that seemed to drink the light. Ricardo's thermal camera picked up an anomaly beneath the altar, a faint, cool patch defying the jungle heat. He dug. He found a sealed clay jar humming with low-frequency energy. Inside, wrapped in dried human skin, was an object that defied logic. A tiny, perfectly sculpted heart of ice, still slightly frosted. He immediately took the ice heart, believing it was the key to Finch's disappearance. That night, as he camped outside the abandoned village, the temperature in his tent plummeted. He could see his own breath. He tried to warm the ice heart by the fire, but the moment it was exposed to the light and heat, it began to sing, a high-pitched metallic whine that vibrated deep in his skull. As he listened, he realized the sound was not random. It was a distorted recording of Finch's voice, played backward. Driven by a paralyzing chill, Ricardo watched the ice heart. It wasn't melting, it was condensing the heat around it. As the fire struggled, the ice heart pulsed with a cold, pale light. The next morning, the sun rose, but Ricardo didn't see it. He woke up, but his vision was blurred. Everything was muted, dark. He was experiencing total, permanent blindness. He was a man who saw only shadows, trapped in a world of perpetual twilight. He was rescued, but the diagnosis was chilling. His retinas and optic nerves were physically undamaged. The doctor hypothesized a psychosomatic trauma, but Ricardo knew better. The ice heart was gone. He later learned the truth from a dying elder in a neighboring tribe. The cult of the perpetual sun performed a black magic ritual where they encased a sacrificial victim's living heart in jungle ice, trading the victim's ability to see the sun for a fortune that would never melt. It was an ultimate trade of light for wealth. Ricardo now lives in a black room, never to see light again. But every night he hears something new, a faint, frantic scratching sound coming from the area of his chest where his heart should be. And sometimes, in his internal darkness, he can see the faintest image, the black obsidian sphere reflecting his wide, unseeing eyes. This artifact's existence was only confirmed by a police report logging a sudden, inexplicable frost found inside a tropical research tent. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of rural Eastern Europe, where the ancient belief in curses turns family bloodlines into a fatal power. The village of Vatra, nestled in the Carpathian foothills of Romania, was a place steeped in shadow. For centuries, the local folklore warned of the Mihai Curse, a black magic spell cast during a land dispute in the 1700s. The curse stated that every firstborn male in the Mihai line would live a life of incredible prosperity, only to die violently on his 35th birthday, his life energy siphoned to sustain the family's wealth. Ilie Mihai was the latest victim in waiting. He was a successful entrepreneur in Bucharest, rich beyond his wildest dreams. But his 35th birthday was only a week away. He hired a private security team and a renowned occult investigator, Dr. Anca Popescu. Anca immediately traveled to the ancestral Mihai home in Vatra. She noticed the house was eerily opulent, a modern fortress among the dilapidated village homes. In the basement, she found the curse's focal point, a massive rusted iron safe built into the foundation, secured by an archaic 5-inch thick iron key. The local priest confirmed the legend. The family patriarch, centuries ago, had buried a ritual key infused with black magic beneath the house, sacrificing his own firstborn's future to guarantee wealth. The safe, they believed, held the key to the curse's eternal renewal. Anca used a specialized geological scanner on the safe. It registered a chilling anomaly. Not just metal, but a dense, non-metallic organic mass inside the sealed safe. As Ilie's 35th birthday approached, the walls of the Bucharest mansion began to weep. Not water, but a thick, viscous liquid that smelled metallic and sweet like stale blood. Ilie became violently ill, suffering from rapid, unexplained internal bleeding. On the night before his birthday, Anca broke into the safe in Vatra. It was a slow, agonizing process. When the heavy iron door finally groaned open, she was met not with a vault of gold, but a small copper box pulsing with a faint, weak heat. Inside the box, nestled on a bed of dried herbs, was an object that turned her stomach. A perfectly preserved, desiccated human umbilical cord, tied tightly with a single strand of gray silk. The organic mass the scanner detected was the preserved life source of the entire Mihai bloodline. As she stared at the desiccated cord, it began to twitch. Suddenly, her phone rang. It was Ilie, his voice barely a whisper. "Anca, it started. I feel cold, so cold. It's pulling." Anca knew the curse was activated. She grabbed a ritual knife and cut the gray silk binding the umbilical cord. In Bucharest, Ilie's convulsions stopped. The bleeding ceased. He lived. Anca returned to the basement to find the copper box empty. The umbilical cord was gone. But beneath where it lay, a new object sat. The original, archaic iron key. She picked up the key. It was icy cold, but its surface was no longer rusty. It was polished, shiny, and new. And engraved into the head of the key, she saw a single, clear date. The 35th birthday of Ilie's firstborn son. The curse hadn't been broken. It had simply been reset.
guaranteeing a life of prosperity for Ilie at the inevitable cost of his own child. The family's dark contract was still binding, renewed by the act of touching the key. Anka dropped the key, her hands covered in the viscous, stale-smelling liquid. This key was later recovered by local authorities. They noted that no amount of scrubbing could remove the thin film of sweet, metallic liquid from its surface. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of Japan, where a cursed video game doesn't just steal your time, it steals your years.
Kenji was a promising but perpetually lazy software engineer in Tokyo, spending most of his time on an obscure retro console. He found a new game online, Yume no Kage, Shadow of the Dream. The description was brief. Achieve the final level and live the years you spent playing. The game was a brutal resource management RPG. Kenji was hooked. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. He barely ate, slept, or left his apartment. His co-workers noticed his rapid physical decline. He was 30, but looked 50. He finally reached the final level, a dark, silent labyrinth. His character, an aged warrior, stood before a portal. As he pressed enter, his console screen flashed white, and a booming, disembodied voice filled his apartment. The price is paid. The years are yours. Kenji felt a sudden electric surge. He looked in the mirror and saw his own face, youthful, vibrant, and terrifyingly young. He was, impossibly, 25 again. The game had not given him back his time. It had stolen the time of his future self and cashed it in all at once. His youth was short-lived. A week later, he was plagued by a terrifying new phenomenon. Objects around him began to age at an accelerated rate. Milk soured instantly. Fresh bread molded in hours. His digital devices degraded, their batteries dying, their screens flickering and failing. His world was collapsing into decay around him, the reverse mirror of his stolen years. He realized the curse wasn't just physical. It was a form of temporal black magic, transferring the entropy, the decay of his lost future onto his surroundings. The game was powered by the desperate wish to reclaim lost time, and the price was paid not in money, but in the accelerated decay of his present. Kenji tried to find the game's creator. He traced the upload back to a remote, abandoned server farm in Hokkaido. He traveled there, finding the facility empty, cold, and dark. But on the main server tower, he found a single, non-functional keyboard. Stuck to the Enter key was a small, dried piece of human skin. He ran a diagnostic on the tower. The only active file was a text log recording thousands of successful final-level completions, and beneath that, a simple, terrifying entry. New player, Kenji. Estimated time till total entropy, 48 hours. Kenji fled. He didn't make it. He was found 2 days later, not dead,
but completely withered. His skin was parchment thin, his hair white, his eyes sunk deep into his skull. He looked over 100 years old. The console was recovered. The police technician who picked it up noted a strange detail. The game cartridge, normally plastic, was now brittle and cracked, as if it had aged a century in 2 days. When he placed it on his desk, the fluorescent light above it spontaneously exploded in a shower of rust and sparks. This console was destroyed in a subsequent lab fire caused by unexplained accelerated metal fatigue in the wiring. Now, let's move to the next story, one that came from the darkest corners of an ancient Celtic ruin, where the curse is not personal, but territorial.
The remote Scottish village of Dunferth was being eyed by a major land developer. The village sat next to the ruins of an Iron Age Celtic fort, a spot locals had always called the Salt-Bound Land. The locals told the developer's geologist, Dr. Fiona Reed, that the ancient shamans had performed a ritual of Geas, a curse meant to eternally bind the land to its people. The developer ignored the folklore. They found the core of the problem, a low, moss-covered stone at the ruin's center. Fiona's scans showed an impossibly high concentration of minerals beneath it, including trace elements of what appeared to be human bone ash and sea salt. The developer ordered the stone removed. The moment the excavators pulled it free, a high-pitched, collective moan echoed from the nearby hills, loud enough to stop traffic 10 miles away. That night, Dunferth was hit by a freak coastal fog. It was thick, metallic, and carried an overpowering scent of ancient brine and decaying earth. The fog didn't lift for 3 weeks. Fiona noticed strange physical changes in the villagers. Their skin was pale, dry, and cracked, and they suffered from an unquenchable, agonizing thirst. Their eyes, once blue or green, began to cloud over, turning a dull, milky gray. The geologist realized the curse was draining the vital water from the blood and tissue of anyone living on the land, slowly turning them into desiccated husks. Desperate, Fiona researched the Geas ritual. The only way to reverse a salt-bound curse was to replace the stone and bind it with fresh blood, the blood of an outsider who trespassed with ill intent. She contacted the developer, demanding they halt operations. They refused. Fiona returned to the ruin. The massive hole left by the removed stone was now filled with a shimmering, knee-deep liquid. It was pure, crystallized sea salt, dissolving into a slurry. She had to replace the stone, but she couldn't move it alone, and the villagers were too weak to help. In a moment of terrifying clarity, Fiona realized the developer himself was the only person who could break the curse. He was the malicious trespasser. She sent him a cryptic message: "Your investment is at risk. Meet me at the ruins at midnight." He arrived, arrogant and angry. As he stood at the edge of the salt-filled pit, the fog grew thicker, the metallic scent overwhelming. The ground beneath his feet turned suddenly slick. He slipped.
He fell headfirst into the pit, and the crystalline salt water, hyper-saturated with bone ash, immediately covered him. He thrashed, but the heavy stone, seemingly sentient, rolled back into the pit, pinning him down. His screams were muffled by the dense fog. Fiona didn't move. She watched as the milky gray cloud in the villager's eyes began to recede, and the sound of distant running water began to echo through the silence. The next morning, the fog was gone. The stone was back in place. The villagers were miraculously healthy. But the developer was gone, and the salt pit was empty. Fiona found a single piece of evidence on the top of the newly seated stone, where the moss had just begun to grow back. A single patch of dark earth was left behind. In that patch, a deep, round indentation, the exact size and shape of a human eye, was clearly visible, filled with sparkling, dry, salt crystals. This report was submitted by Dr. Reed, who abruptly resigned and was later found sailing the North Sea with a large, inexplicable scar across her palm. Now, let's move to the final story, one that came from the darkest corners of a modern city where the ultimate black magic is performed in plain sight.
Julian Voss was an architect obsessed with negative space. Not just empty rooms, but spaces that actively subtracted light, sound, and life. He believed this was the new occult, the creation of a perfect void, capable of drawing energy from the living world. His new commission was the Solstice Tower, a skyscraper designed entirely around this philosophy. Julian used forbidden Enochian sigils translated from arcane texts to design the tower's internal structure. These sigils were not drawn on paper. They were engineered into the very acoustics, ventilation, and light systems. The sigils were intended to create pockets of true, energetic blackness that would amplify his personal power. The tower's first tenants moved in. The effects were immediate and horrific. People began suffering from profound anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, joy, or emotion. They were physically fine, but emotionally empty, husks of their former selves. The darkness wasn't just physical, it was soul deep. An investigative journalist, Lena, went undercover. She felt the chill immediately. Inside the central atrium, sound seemed to die instantly, creating a pressure that made her ears ache. Her camera equipment failed repeatedly, the batteries draining in minutes. Lena discovered the source, a hidden room, the architect's gallery at the tower's core. Julian used it as his command center. On the night of the winter solstice, she broke in. The room was pitch black, silent, and overwhelmingly cold. Lena turned on her thermal camera. She saw Julian standing in the center, but his thermal signature was weak, almost non-existent, a pale blue ghost in the center of the frame. He was barely radiating any heat or any life at all. Julian spoke, his voice thin and hollow. "This tower is perfect. It is a vessel. It is drawing all the emotional warmth, the joy, the ambition from the city, and channeling it to me. I have built the perfect black magic circle, and the price is the collective soul of this block."
Lena raised her camera. She noticed a detail in the thermal view that made her blood run cold. Radiating from Julian's hands, not heat, but lines of pure solid blackness were snaking across the floor, connecting to the very structural beams of the tower. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, not the room lights, but the emergency exit signs. Julian screamed, not in pain, but in rage, as the red light briefly illuminated his face. Lena didn't run. She noticed a tiny glowing object in the center of the room, a small, child's toy top that was spinning silently, perpetually. It was the only thing radiating any measurable heat or emotional warmth. It was the only object in the entire structure that Julian's void could not consume. Julian lunged for the top, his movements jerky and desperate. He knocked Lena over, grabbed the top, and crushed it in his hand. The moment he did, the temperature in the room normalized. Sound rushed back in, overwhelming and deafening. Julian looked around, his face suddenly full of fear and confusion. His black magic engine had failed. Later, Lena found Julian wandering the streets, completely stripped of his anhedonia, but also of his ambition and memories. He was just a hollow man, a vessel of zero passion. She was hailed as a hero, but when she reviewed the footage of the night, she found the final, chilling anomaly. The final frame was a static shot of the empty room. But in the center of the image, where the spinning top had been, there was a single, perfect hole in the film reel, a circle of absolute, unrecoverable blackness. This footage was recovered by a specialist who noted the camera's internal mechanism had been subjected to a highly localized, unexplained vacuum. Which of these tales unsettled you the most? Tell us in the comments, and remember, keep your lights on, because the Watchman is still watching.
You've seen their stories, but the darkness